Absolute value equations. So it's going to look like this. Let's look at a simple one to begin with. Suppose I want to solve, now this is the simplest one that you could ever have. Suppose you want to solve absolute value of x equal 2. Let's suppose you had this. Now, if you can't remember, now it's going to get a little bit complicated, but to help you remember what to do, always remember this one. So if the absolute value of x equal 2, now you got to remember something about absolute value from a previous course. If I ask you what the absolute value of 3 is, what are you going to say? 3. If I ask you what's the absolute value of -5, what are you going to say? 5. Because remember, absolute value measures the distance that a number is from 0 on the number line. So if I have this number line here, and this is 0, and I want to know what's the absolute value of 3, so I want to know what is the distance that 3 is from 0. What's that distance? 3. Same thing for absolute value -5. So I'm going to go to -5, and I'm asking what's the distance that -5 is from 0? The answer is 5. So distance is always positive. All right, so let's think about this. The absolute value of what number is 2?
2.
Okay, x equal 2 works. I agree with that. Because if I plug it back in, what's the absolute value of 2? 2, and 2 equals 2. Okay, is there another one? -2. Okay, so x equals a -2. -2 works as well, because the absolute value of -2 is also 2. So here's the idea. So whenever you solve an absolute value equation, now it's the same, the beginning is the same like the square root property. I'm sorry, the radical equation, excuse me. So remember when you solved the radical equation, you had to get the radical by itself. Same thing with absolute value. You got to get the absolute value by itself. So is the absolute value by itself? Okay, so all you do is this. So I'm going to go ahead and rewrite this. So when you get the absolute value by itself, you're now going to split it into 2 equations. You're going to split it into 2 equations without the absolute value bars. And so basically what you do is you rewrite the expression that's on the inside. What expression is on the inside? Just x. And you can say x equal this on the other side. What does that equal? 2. So there's this one right here. So there's one of your solutions. Then you're going to say also, I'm going to rewrite the expression that's on the inside, which is what? X equal, and then you're going to take the opposite of the other side. What's the opposite of the other side? -2. So basically, the first one's easy for students, and that's the one that sometimes students will only write this one, but remember, there's got to be how many equations? 2. So they'll rewrite it without the absolute value bar and say x equal 2, and there's the only one, but it's not. That's not the only equation. What's the other equation? X equal the opposite. So 2 and its opposite, 2 and its opposite. Remember, it's opposite. Because think about it this way. The absolute value of 3 equals 3, and so does the absolute value of -3. And if you look at the number line, 3 and -3, aren't they on opposite sides of 0? Same distance? Okay, so remember, 3 and its opposite, 2 and its opposite. So then that takes us to this. What if you want to solve? Let's put this number 1. What if you ask to solve the absolute value of x minus 3 is equal to 6? Okay, same idea. So I want to know what must x be so that the distance of x minus 3 is 6 units from 0. So that's what you're asked to find. But how do you solve it? You split it into how many equations? 2. And then you think about this. Always think about the simple one. So if you can't remember right away, go back to this one. All right, what if I have the absolute value of 2? Well, if I have the absolute value of 2, my solutions are -2 and what else? And +2. So then you say x equal 2 and its opposite, x equal -2. And remember, the x came from the expression on the inside. But what's the expression on the inside here? X minus 3. So this is my first equation. Equal what?
6.
Equals 6. And then x minus 3s equal what?
-6.
And there you go. There's your equations. And you just solve for x. So it's that simple. But you got to remember, absolute value equations, you can end up with how many solutions? I'm sorry, how many equations, excuse me? 2. Okay. So all you do is just rewrite it without the absolute value bars, though. You see, there's no longer absolute value bars. And also remember, the absolute value must be by itself. Okay? And then just solve for x. So what's one of my solutions? 9. Solve for x. What's the other solution? Negative 3. Negative 3. So in the blank, you'll say x equal blank, negative 3, comma, 9. Okay? Now remember, at this point, I don't have to check solutions here. I only had to check it at this point when I raised both sides to even power the previous lesson. That's the only time I checked it. Okay, the next one, what if you had this? What if you had the absolute value of 2x minus 1 minus 2 equal 6? Okay, I'm making this up though. So what if I had that? Right. So again, some students will make the mistake. Some students will make this mistake. They'll say, I'm going to go ahead and rewrite it as 2x minus 1 minus 2 equals 6, and then 2x minus 1 minus 2 equals a negative 6. That doesn't work. You're losing one of your solutions. One's correct, one's not. So what is it you got to do first? What is it you got to do first before you break it apart? You got to get the absolute value by itself. Okay? So remember, step 1 should always be isolate the absolute value. All right? So I'm going to add 2 to both sides. So then I get the absolute value of 2x minus 1 equals 8. Okay? And then step 2 is to do what? Write as 2 equations. That's your step 2. So write as 2 equations. All right? And so what's one of my equations?
2x minus 1 equals 8.
And what's the other one?
2x minus 1 equals -8.
Yep. And then so notice I went from an absolute value equation to 2 linear, and I just solved for those linear equations. So I add 1 to both sides, combine like terms. What does 2x equal?
9.
So what does x equal?
9/2.
Okay, so there's one of your solutions. Over here, add 1 to both sides, combine like terms. What does 2x equal?
-7.
So what does x equal?
-7/2.
Yeah, so those are your solutions. So the step 3 would be to solve. All right, so you can say x equal -7/2, comma, 9/2. So that's what you put in the blank. -7/2, comma, 9/2. Okay? All right, now what if you had this? All right, now listen carefully to this. What if you had 2 times the absolute value of 3x plus 5 equal 8? All right. What might you want to do first? Yeah, so I think, remember we had done a problem earlier. It wasn't absolute value, but it was something similar to it, where you had to get the divide by 2. I forgot what it was, what we were dealing with. But yeah, you get the absolute value by itself. So right now, multiply by 2, the opposite is 2, divide by 2. All right. Now I'm going to say this. If you were to distribute, now remember, you really distribute if these were parentheses, right? And if you were to distribute the positive 2, that would be okay. But if this were a negative 2, you really don't want to do that. So if this were a negative 2, you want to divide both sides by -2. Okay, so no, that's a positive 8. So what I'm saying is that you should always get the absolute value by itself, because it's hard to remember. Well, he said if it's positive 2, I can distribute, but if it's a negative 2, I need to divide by -2, which if it's negative, you really do need to do that. So the best thing to do is to always do what? Divide by 2. All right, so divide by 2. Get the absolute value by itself. Remember, everything was similar. Radical equation, you get the radical by itself. Absolute value equation, get the absolute value by itself. So I don't have the absolute value by itself here because there's 2 on the outside. Right now I'm multiplying by 2. What's the opposite of multiplying by 2? What's the opposite of multiplying by 2? Divide by 2. And so now the 2's divide out. And now, what's the absolute value?
3x plus 5.
Equal what?
4.
4. All right, and then the rest is simple. What's the next step? Yep, write two equations. What's going to be my first equation?
2x plus 5 equals 4.
Yeah. What's the other?
3x plus 5 equals -1.
Yep. And so notice I went from a absolute value equation to two linear. So I'm going to subtract 5 from both sides. Combine like terms. 3x equal,
-1.
so what does x equal? Over here, subtract 5. I get 3x equal what?
-1.
All right, now I'm going to go ahead and rewrite this. So if I divide both sides by 3, what does x equal?
-3.
-3. So my solutions are -1/3, comma, -3. Okay? All right, so my math lab, and that's all this is. So my math lab, you're going to have, remember there being one like this, and on your worksheet there's one like this as well. And then one where the absolute value is not by itself, so you have to either add or subtract from both sides. And then I think there's one where it's simple like this. Okay. Now, a special case, and I didn't ask this on a worksheet, and I wouldn't ask this on a test, and I don't think it's on my math lab, but you still need to know that something like this could happen. What if you're asked to solve this? Absolute value of x equal -6. Absolute value of x equal -6. All right, think about that. The absolute value of what number is a -6?
Nothing.
Very good, nothing. Because the absolute value of a number is always what?
Positive.
Positive. So remember, the absolute value of x measures the distance that whatever x is from 0, right? And I want that distance to be negative. Is the distance ever negative? No. So here you would say no solution. No solution. Okay? Because if you say, what about -6? So if you say, well, is -6 a solution? Well, let's think about that. Let's plug in -6 in for x. What's the absolute value? And I want to see if that's equal to 6. What's the absolute value of -6? I'm sorry, -6. What's the absolute value of -6? Is 6 equal to -6? No. So -6 is not a solution. So is +6. +6 is not a solution either, because the absolute value of 6 is 6, and 6 is not equal to -6. So if you get the absolute value by itself, and the number on the outside is negative, then automatically you can say what? No solution. So if you had this, 3 times the absolute value of x plus 6 equal -8. You might say, well, I got to get the absolute value by itself, so I have to divide by 3. Okay, that's true, but this is still going to be what?
Negative.
Negative. So right away you can say what? No solution. All right. So remember that they do exist. These problems like this do exist. I don't think they asked you that on my math lab, and I didn't ask you that on a test or a worksheet, but you would say no solution. Okay? So absolute value is very simple. That's the easy kind. Get it by itself, split it into two equations, and solve. You're done. So based on what we did so far today, the one that you really need to focus on so far is the radical equation, where you end up having quadratic. All right, so any question at this point? Okay.